Hello and welcome back to another video. So today we are going to be reviewing and going over my thoughts and opinions on the first expansion of Final Fantasy XIV, Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward, which I have now completely finished. So before we get into the meat review, I want to start off by going over a few points that I spoke about in my A Realm Reborn review, which if you haven't checked out, you can click up and check it out now if you want to, and see how those points have developed now that I have gone through more of the game. In my last review, I split the video up in explaining positives and things I liked about the game and negatives and things I didn't like about the game, and I won't be doing that this time, but let me go through a couple of the things that I thought were negative and let's see how I think about those now. The first thing I want to talk about is the graphical glitches that I experienced in A Realm Reborn. I experienced a lot of flickering, like leaves and bushes and on foliage and things like that. That did improve a little bit in Heavensward. I do think that is mainly due to the fact that there are less foresty areas in Heavensward, but that was kind of a nitpick anyway, so I just thought I'd address that. Although it didn't really affect my experience at all. The next negative I want to address is the combat. In A Realm Reborn, I said it felt very slow, and in Heavensward it feels way better, especially when you get to the later levels. It feels like your rotation is really starting to fill out and build more, although I'm told that you don't really feel your whole class until you finish Stormblood, so I'll obviously update that opinion when I get there, but it is much better, much better. So now we've gone over those things, I think it's about time we got into the review, and the first thing I want to talk about is the story. Okay, now don't worry, there will be no spoilers at all in this review. I will not be discussing anything specific at all. I know that might disappoint a few people, but I want this review and this video to be accessible to people who have never played before. I want to start with the very last thing you do in A Realm Reborn, which is the cutscene, which is, for me, was about 45 minutes long, called The Parting Glass. Now, some of you will know what that is, and some of you will know why that moment is so significant in the story. I felt, and I think pretty much everyone feels, that the story in A Realm Reborn is fine. It's fairly linear and quite predictable until you make it to the Parting Glass cutscene, where it all just kicks off from there. Everything completely changes, and it feels like everything is just ramped up massively. The stakes are much higher. It feels like from this point on, the game grabs you by the scruff of the neck and pulls you through into a different kind of chapter, and I absolutely loved it. It is at that moment, when you finish that cutscene, when you realise that this is a different type of game. This is not the MMOs that you are typically used to playing. This is a whole different thing. And I'm not going to say anything specific, but there's a lovely little callback right at the end of that cutscene that I had no expectation that they were going to do anything with that particular character, but they did, and it was very cool, and I loved it very much. So now we've got through the Parting Glass, we get into what I thought of the actual full story of Heavensward. Bear in mind, I'm not going to be going into anything specific, but I have to say that it is probably one of, if not the best story I've ever experienced in any MMO. The way that the story was presented and delivered to you didn't feel like an MMO story, it felt like a Final Fantasy adventure, a proper Final Fantasy adventure, and I absolutely loved it. The story is incredibly deep and has multiple levels and multiple themes. Themes of war, it has themes of tradition, it has themes of religion, it has themes of loyalty, of betrayal, of friendship, of relationships, of myths, of politics. It is a very deep story, and it is a real step up from the story that we experienced in A Realm Reborn. There are some definitely poignant and definitely emotional moments that you will experience in the story, and there are very solemn moments that will really stick with you. I think the most important thing to point out is that every single large or poignant moment that happened in Heavensward was earned. Nothing felt rushed, nothing felt kind of fudged around to make it work. Everything, they spent the time, they put the effort in, and they put in the work, and it shows. It was absolutely fantastic all the way through. I thought the story was paced extremely well. I didn't feel like there was any point I was getting bored or any point where I felt the story was getting slow. I'll go into characters a bit further later on, but I felt that now I was starting to get emotionally connected to the characters, and when things actually happened to them, I felt an emotional reaction to that as well. So it's safe to say that the story in Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward was a huge step up from A Realm Reborn. When you get there, you're going to wonder where this has been all along, and I can only really push you to play it, because obviously I don't want to spoil it. Now, that being said, was there any moment that I felt like it absolutely blew my mind, or was there any moment where it emotionally destroyed me, or anything like that? I'm going to say not really. There were definitely moments where I was emotional, and moments where I was extremely impressed, but there's nothing that was like mind-shattering, like change my outlook on life kind of moment, you know. But still hugely improved from A Realm Reborn. But I think for those completely like, from what I've been told and from the reactions that I see from other people, that I need to wait until Shadowbringers until I get those completely mind-bending moments, but I'll be sure to talk about those when I get there. I think it's important to mention that I played through Heavensward as a Dragoon, and basically the Dragoon class is kind of like the poster boy for Heavensward, and is a class that is hugely featured throughout the entire expansion. And the class quest for the Dragoon in A Realm Reborn felt like a prologue to Heavensward, to be honest. And if you do play through Heavensward as a Dragoon, you get completely unique dialogue that no one else gets. And you feel that much, well, I felt that much more connected to the story because I was, like, my job, my class in it is actively involved. So if it's important for you to feel completely immersed in the story, it may be worth leveling up a Dragoon and playing through Heavensward as a Dragoon, although it's not required, and I think for the vast majority of people it's not going to make much of a difference. But if you are really set on like getting into this game and kind of RPing it a little bit, then I would say definitely level up a Dragoon beforehand. Right, so now we'll go on to the group content and the dungeons and the instance content. So in terms of how it compares to A Realm Reborn, it's way better. The layouts of the dungeons are far more interesting, and the instances feel properly connected to the story, whereas A Realm Reborn, you're kind of going through the quests and then there'll be some bad people and you go and do a dungeon about those bad people, and it didn't really make sense in the whole overarching story, whereas in Heavensward, every single dungeon that you do is part of the story and makes complete sense. It made the story flow a lot better. It kind of made it feel like you were going through the chapters, and you know when you get to a dungeon or you get to a trial moment that you get excited for it because you know you're about to experience something very important. There's a lot of dungeons that I absolutely loved in this, and trials that I loved in this, so I'm going to list off a few. So the first one I loved was the end boss. I'm not going to say what it's called because I don't want to spoil it. The Great Google Library I thought was extremely creative, and I loved the music. It was very, very cool. The Limitless Blue felt like a proper Final Fantasy boss fight. Final Steps of Faith, not going to speak about what happened because obvious reasons, but what an extremely cool moment that was. I hope I say this right, but Thok Ast Thok, incredible music, incredible. Really sets the tone for what that trial is. Like pretty much all of them. Like when I was going back through writing this review and looking back over all of the dungeons, I have vivid memories of all of them, and that just shows how much better they are than the ones in A Realm Reborn. Also, a good point to mention that some of these dungeons are actually outside as well, which feels so much better. It feels like you're breathing air and you're not claustrophobic in these corridor dungeons. It's much, much better. Another important point to mention about these dungeons is that they are more complex than the A Realm Reborn ones. So I actually would recommend looking up guides before you get into these dungeons or trials. I actually ended up writing down some notes before I would go into these dungeons and trials beforehand, so I didn't forget what I was supposed to do when I was in them. The mechanics in them are a lot more complicated now, and some of them are very specific to the dungeon, so it's important to look at the guides before you go into them. That being said, if you're wanting to go into these instances blind, you probably can. Like, you're not gonna die or anything. Like, the power creep in the game has made it so a lot of these dungeons are still very, very easy, but if you want to look like you know what you're doing, then it's good to watch guides first. But to be honest, if you really don't want to, you'll be alright. Just tell people when you get into the dungeon that you don't know what you're doing, and they'll explain it to you, I'm sure. Okay, one thing I'll address quickly is PvP and crafting, which is something that I have not touched on yet. I'm planning on doing that very soon, but I think I'll have to dedicate specific whole videos to these things in the future. But just so you know that I will be looking into those very soon. Alright, so now we're going to go back into it, and we're going to talk about the music in Final Fantasy XIV. Soundtrack, I mean, as you would expect it is for most MMOs, and it is especially in most Square Enix role-playing games and Final Fantasy games, is that the soundtrack is as close to perfection as you can get. I thought it was thematically perfect. I thought every single track really adds to the story moment. There's no bad track in Heavensward. Everything is a pleasure to listen to. Huge variety as well in scale, in grandeur, in genre. A few of the older stuff that I love was the Great Google Library soundtrack, Thok Astok as well, I thought was phenomenal, and the main Heavensward theme, and tons of others as well. The music was a true pleasure to listen to while playing through. So when you do get to Heavensward, make sure you turn that volume up and enjoy the music. Right, and the last thing I want to talk about before I conclude the review is the characters. And I felt like the characters were presented in a much better way, and I did touch on this briefly earlier. I thought in A Realm Reborn the characters were kind of bland. Like, we didn't really know anything about them other than that they were there. Basically, we never actually got to learn anything about these characters. We never spent any time with them, so we had no real reason to care about these characters in A Realm Reborn. And that's why it's different in Heavensward. In A Realm Reborn, we did quests for the characters. In Heavensward, we do quests with the characters. That is the major difference between the base game and Heavensward. You get to spend quality time with them, you get to learn about them. There's nothing, as I said, in the story and the pacing, nothing is rushed. Like, you really do begin to get a sense and a feel for who these people are, and you do begin fully begin to empathize with these characters. You will feel connected to all of them, and it kind of feels like, I think, which is what they wanted to achieve in A Realm Reborn, which they didn't, but they did definitely achieve in Heavensward, making the Science of the Seventh Dawn feel kind of like your friends or your family. Because of the writing and because of the pacing and the time you spend with these characters and the depth to the story and the depth to the characters, that feeling is earned. It's a real step up, and it does really make you feel like you are truly a part of this story. My final thoughts for Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward is that it was absolutely brilliant. I loved every second of it. It is a huge improvement from A Realm Reborn. It delivers an expertly crafted story with deep character, very memorable moments that will have you glued to this game from the very start to the very moment that you finish the expansion. I am fully invested in this game and in this journey now, so Stormblood review will be coming very soon. A lot of people who've played through this game will tell you that that you need to get through A Realm Reborn because Heavensward is where it gets good. And I am now going to join these people to echo that sentiment that yes, they are absolutely correct. Heavensward is where it really picks up. And I recommend it to any RPG fan. You need to play through Heavensward. What an experience. So I'm going to conclude this review by saying that Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward is one of, if not the best expansion that I've played from any MMO so far, and that is high praise. Have you played through Heavensward? What did you think? Why don't you let me know in the comments below? And I'm well into Stormblood now, so that is something that I will be reviewing in the future. So if you want to see that, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you like the video, make sure you hit that like button. Did you agree or disagree with me? Let me know in the comments below. Have I said anything factually incorrect? Let me know as well, and I will pin the comment. Follow my social medias, my Twitch, my Instagram, and my TikTok, and all of that stuff, my Twitter. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I very much hope to see you in the next video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.